Boost, overdrive, and distortion. What are the differences and which one should you pick for your rig, and how do you combine them to get the widest variety and best tones? This is something that confused me for a really long time when I was first starting out in the world of pedals, so today's video is going to be what I wish I could have watched all of those years ago. We're going to talk about the differences, how they work, how to combine them, and how to pick the right one and the right setup for your rig. So the rig we're going to be using today is my 65 SG Junior into the brand new Supro Blackmagic Reverb TB. This is my very good friend Tyler Bryant's new signature amp with Supro. He asked them to send this out to me a few weeks ago, and they very graciously did. Tyler and I have been friends for a really long time. He really understands great guitar tone. He understands how to get good sounds out of an amp, and this amp is pretty rad. I'll have links to the amp as well as the pedals that we're going to be talking about in today's video, all in the description box down below, and those are going to be Sweetwater affiliate links, and I want to thank Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. If you click any of those links down below, I'll earn a small commission, which helps me out in keeping this channel going, and I greatly appreciate it. And I'll also have links to some of my other favorite pedals in all of these three categories that Sweetwater offers, all in the description box down below. And while you're down there, please subscribe. Still, according to the analytics, 60% of the people that watch this channel regularly aren't subscribed, so hit that red button. So with all that out of the way, let's get plugged up and get our first pedal going. Pedals, let's talk about distortion and actually try and understand what is happening. So when I play my guitar, the pickup is creating a very, very small electrical signal, a very low voltage that travels through the circuitry and down my instrument cable to the amplifier. Now this is a tube amp, which means it has vacuum tubes. It's completely analog. And basically those tubes are there to take that very weak, very small electrical signal and amplify it, make it louder, shape the tone, give it some character, and then push it through the speaker, amplifying the signal. Now, electrical components like tubes have a certain bandwidth. They have a threshold or a ceiling to where they can take that electrical signal, that sine wave, and they can amplify it to a specific point while remaining relatively clean. But we can take that tube and push it beyond its limits. We can push that signal beyond what the tube was designed to amplify past. And this is where we get what's called clipping or distortion. Put simply, clipping is where you take that sine wave, that signal, and you start to chop off the peaks and the troughs of that wave. You're clipping the signal. And this gives us a really pleasing sound because it's introducing a lot of harmonics and overtones and richness to our guitar sound. And this is why I always say, even with a clean sound, you want a little bit of distortion, a little bit of saturation, because you're adding harmonics, you're adding compression, which helps your guitar sit better in a mix and just sounds better overall. Now, there's several ways to introduce clipping or distortion into your signal. The first way is to just turn your amplifier up, which this Supro is actually really, really good at. It's capable of great natural amp overdrive tones because of the way the circuit is designed. And that same process still applies. We're overloading, we're overdriving the tubes in the circuitry and clipping our guitar signal, introducing compression and harmonics and distortion. But not all amplifiers are capable of great overdrive like this amp is. And that's where our first pedal comes in, the boost. The job of a boost pedal is simple. Like the name implies, it is boosting your signal going into the front of the amplifier. This guitar is only capable of outputting so much voltage, so much signal, right? If I turn my volume knob all the way up to 10 and I play the guitar, the signal can only get so loud going into the amplifier. But let's say I want to make that signal louder, to hit the front end of the amp harder, to hit those first tubes harder and push them into overdrive and clipping. This is where the boost pedal comes in. So the pedal we're using here is the Zeo from Source Audio. It's a fully analog boost with a few interesting and useful features. I love this pedal. Basically, it models several different types of analog circuits that can be used for boosts, like a JFET boost circuit, a studio preamp, like a microphone preamp, or the Echoplex setting, which emulates the preamp of an old Echoplex tape echo. So right now I've got it on the JFET setting, and we'll put the tone knob on the middle. So essentially what we're doing here is just adding signal. So here's how I've got the amp set right now. It's relatively clean. Now listen to what happens when I just kick on the boost. Now we have a lot of distortion, tons of overdrive, some natural compression, a lot of harmonics. It sounds great. And what's cool about this is that overdrive sound is not coming from the pedal at all. It's the amp's natural overdrive. We're simply hitting the front of the amp harder, which is pushing it into overdrive, which I couldn't do with just the guitar. Now, like I said earlier, this amp is capable of doing that on its own without the help of a boost pedal. But let's say I was on a gig and I needed to have a good clean sound from the amplifier. I needed some headroom for some nice reverbs and delays, some clean parts and things like that. But I need to sometimes get that natural distortion sound. That's where the boost pedal comes in. The other cool thing about this is you're keeping the character of the amp intact. Like we'll see with some of the overdrive and especially the distortion options, we're completely changing the way the amp sounds. But with an amp like this, I like the way it sounds. I just want to get more out of it. So the boost pedal is the perfect solution for that. Everyone should have a boost on their board, not just for this use case, but to also pair with your overdrives or fuzzes or distortions, which we'll talk about in just a second. Overdrive is probably the bread and butter effect for most guitar players out there, and there's good reason for it. This sort of like three-sided gain staging pedal shootout thing, I think overdrive is the most versatile because you can turn an overdrive pedal very easily into a boost. Some overdrives you can push into full-on distortion. Now, the drive we've got here is the Wannabee from Beetronics. It's actually two different overdrive pedals in one. On the left side, you have a traditional blues breaker style overdrive circuit, and on the right side, you have a clon style circuit. You can stack the two together, you can change their order or run them in parallel, which is really nice. But the main difference between a boost pedal and an overdrive pedal is now we're starting to actually introduce some clipping into our signal before the amplifier. With the boost, we were just making the signal louder going into the amp and getting the amp to break up. With an overdrive pedal, depending on the circuit, we're going to use components like diodes or JFETs or LEDs to actually introduce some clipping or some distortion into the guitar signal before it hits the amplifier. Now this is cool because this lets you get some really great saturated overdrive tones at lower volumes. With the boost, to get this amp to break up like that, I was pushing it pretty hard. Now this amp has a nice master volume on it, but some amps don't. So if you're just using a boost pedal, you can get the amp to sound great, but it might be too loud. With an overdrive pedal though, by introducing the distortion signal going into the amplifier, I can keep the amp at a lower overall volume and get the overdrive sound that I want. The other nice thing is we can change the character of the overdrive sound going into the amp. I can have it be thin and bright or smooth and mid-rangey or anything in between. So for example, let's hear what the blues breaker side of this pedal is doing. That sounds totally different than the way the amp was breaking up with the boost. And that's because this blues breaker circuit is introducing that gain going into the front of the amp. And I'm also hitting it a little harder by pushing this volume control. So I'm getting some overdrive, some color, and some saturation from the pedal. And I'm also getting the amp to break up a little bit more, which is a really, really cool thing to do. But listen to how different the clon side sounds. thousands of different overdrive pedals out there based on multiple different circuit designs and variations of those circuit designs and different layouts. It's a very, very vast and deep world of pedals. And if you're like me, you'll end up with dozens of overdrives that all do slightly different things. They have different characters, they respond differently under your hands, they work well with other amps and different guitars. It's a pretty deep and fascinating world, honestly. Now we're on to distortion. Now, the difference between overdrive and distortion, I think, can most basically be boiled down to the type of clipping. Broadly speaking, most overdrive pedals are going to use soft clipping, meaning they're going to try and emulate what a tube naturally does when you overdrive it and push it into distortion. Distortion pedals, like the JHS hard drive, is using more hard clipping. Now, hard clipping is different than soft clipping in that once the signal starts to hit that threshold where it goes into distortion and starts to clip, it doesn't go past. It slices the tops and bottoms of that signal off, hard clipping it. And that gives you a different sound. It gives you a harder, harsher, more grinding, aggressive sound than most overdrives or pushing a tube amp into overdrive, for example. Now, JHS hard drive is an out and out distortion pedal, and I think this is a good example of hard clipping. Obviously, we're getting a ton of distortion, a ton of saturation, but you hear the nature of the breakup, the nature of the distortion is different. It's more aggressive than what we are getting with the overdrives. But the thing to keep in mind here is these different effect types are not distinctly different from each other. A lot of overdrive pedals you can push into distortions. A lot of distortion pedals you can ease off and get more subtle, soft overdrive tones from. They're not all completely distinct and different. And the other thing about a distortion pedal like the hard drive is they're not transparent at all. This is going to completely change the character of your amplifier, which might be exactly what you're looking for. I can tell you that this Supro is not capable of this type of distortion sound on its own. It needs the help of a pedal like the hard drive to get there. So let's try a few different sounds. I'm gonna go for more of like a mid-scooped sound here with a lot of overdrive. Combining these three different effects types, I said earlier that I think everyone should have a boost on their board, and the reason for that is because it is a great utility pedal to use with an overdrive or distortion or fuzz. Now, for a long time on my pedal board, I had 4 different overdrives and 3 different fuzzes and 2 different boosts, and they all kind of sounded the same. But now I've pared that down to my general approach is having an overdrive or some kind of gain pedal, overdrive, distortion, and a boost. And I feel like with the right amp and those 2 pedals, you can do all of the amount of gain that you would need to do for any given situation. So right now I've got an overdrive pedal, the BB preamp from Xotic Effects, and after that I've got a boost pedal, the DCX boost from Origin Effects. So the guitar's hitting the BB preamp first and then going into the boost. And in this setup, I'm using the boost as a solo boost. So I'm getting my overdrive sound from the BB preamp, and then I'm using the boost after it as just a clean boost to make my signal louder to get me to step forward in the mix. Really nice amp-like overdrive sound, but the overall volume is pretty low. So let's say I needed to step out for a solo, I'd hit the boost after it. Now the DCX boost is really nice because I can use it as a tone shaper as well. So in this case, I'm actually using it to add a little bit of low end to the signal and kind of change the EQ because I wanted the amp to kick a little harder with the boost engaged. But that's the way to use boost after the overdrive. Conversely, if you put the boost before the overdrive, it becomes a second gain stage because it's essentially doing the same thing it would do in front of your amplifier. Now it's just in front of the overdrive pedal. It's boosting your signal going into the front of the pedal, which is going to make it clip harder, which is going to give you more distortion, more saturation, compression, sustain, all of those things. So now you can see I've switched the order. We've got the boost going into the overdrive, giving me more distortion, saturation, and sustain. Okay, so those are the differences between boost, overdrive, and distortion. Which one do you like best? Or like myself, do you have and use all three depending on the situation? Let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget, you can check out the affiliate links to all of the gear that I used in today's video, like the new Supro amp and the different pedals, all in the description box down below. Those are Sweetwater links, and I want to thank Sweetwater once again for sponsoring today's video. If you like more videos like this, I've got a whole playlist linked down below that I've been doing for years called Gear Talk with Rhett that dives deep into a lot of these different subjects, so check that out. And also, I have a video course called the Tone Course that really dives deep into this subject and way more. So if you're interested, check that out in the description box down below. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Rhett Shull, and I'll catch you on the next one.